Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Stop me if you've heard this one before. You have a, let us say, young suburban male, and this young suburban man is at a college party. There's a little bit of alcohol involved, but certainly not enough to make you blind drunk. He goes outside, and behind a couple of dumpsters or next to it, he sees a young woman who apparently has passed out, or apparently she's just drunk off her gourd. Rather than calling help for her, or at the very least being on his way, he decides to sexually assault this young woman. He rapes her. And while he's in the process of raping her, he gets spotted by a couple of other young people, and they chase him and eventually catch him, and they hold him for the cops. It took about 1.5 years after the rape for the rapist to be convicted, and when he was, the prosecution asked for at least 6 years minimum, because the guy was looking at up to 14, and the judge decided instead of 6 years, how about 6 months? He was released from prison after serving only 3 months. Now, the victim of this rapist was an underage person herself, and the judge really didn't have much to say about that when it came to explain why it was that he was basically putting the jury verdict aside, though he did make a big deal out of, we don't want to ruin this young man's life. No real mention of how this guy raping this young woman has definitely damaged her life. That wasn't really considered. Now, of course, the person I'm talking about is Brock Turner, the Stanford rapist, who then Judge Aaron Persky allowed to walk with practically no prison time at all. 6 months for rape. That's a freaking joke. That's a slap on the wrist. He said, well, basically the guy will be made to register as a sex offender, and hasn't he been through enough? Now, it was Michelle Dauber, a law professor at Stanford University, who was the one who led the charge to have Judge Aaron Persky recalled. The recall effort was successful. Well, obviously, in this era of Me Too and Time's Up, the white media was congratulating Professor Dauber and her fellow activists, right? This was a victory for women and a message to men, particularly rich white men, that your money won't protect you from the law. That's what the white media was saying, right? Wrong. They were saying the exact opposite. They were saying that this was a terrible day for the judicial process. Oh, this was just a loss for the judicial system. Everyone loses. All of a sudden, the same white media who was causing a total hysteria about Bill Cosby over false accusations, which turned out to predictably be a lie and got overturned, all of a sudden was saying that we can't make judges afraid to go light on defendants when it comes time for sentencing. The same white media that was asking how many decades is Bill Cosby going to get? The same white media that was bemoaning, why is it that these men, these black men with all this money and fame and money, how come the law never touches them, never imprisons them? Yeah, because, God knows that black men get a slap on the wrist from this white judicial system. I mean, black men never go to prison. That's what they were saying about Bill Cosby. It was all about the money and the power. We know it was about the skin color. But the narrative was, what about all this money that these guys have got? It just makes it where the law never touches it. When's someone going to get tough on these guys? Okay, well, you finally had some people who made it where the judges understand you better go tough on these guys, or else the white media will say, oh, wait a minute, let's not get carried away here. The Washington Post's headline, California ousts an elected judge. Everybody loses. Does that include the young woman who Brock Turner raped? Does she lose too? Because I would think that she had lost quite a bit because this judge decided that he was going to just set aside the verdict in all but name, and he's going to be speaking up for the defendant, and he made it very clear he's an advocate for rape. I would have thought that Brock Turner's victim had lost quite a bit before all this, but no real mention of that. And that's another thing you see about the white media. They give an occasional mention to her, but only in passing. They want to make it very clear, this can't stand, because the wrong person's going to jail with the wrong skin color. The white media is acting as the PR team for rapists, and they're being bold about it. The subheadline of this story, the recall of Aaron Persky in the Stanford swimmer sexual assault case, his name is Brock Turner, thank you very much, will make judges harsher and thwart progress on perils of mass incarceration. And of course, they use the image of a black man. That's the buttons that they're pushing here. The white media is trying to convince us that a ridiculous miscarriage of justice A judge unethically, if not illegally, deciding that he's going to ignore the law, and he knows this guy is guilty as sin, but as far as he's concerned, well, we don't really want this rapist to have his life derailed just because he violated a woman. At the very least, we got to give him a sporting chance and let him have 3 or 4 victims before we throw the book at him. They act as if somehow that has something to do with the cause of curbing mass incarceration, when those two issues are separate. Mass incarceration has to do with mostly black people, being given long sentences for low-level crimes like drugs. It also has to do with black defendants being railroaded on little to no evidence against them and given incredibly long sentences just because. Those are actual cases where you have people being given these ridiculously long sentences simply because the court can do so. And you don't see the white media doing a full court press about that. They never have a cause célèbre that they point to and say, here's an example of the court going way too hard on a defendant. Gee, this is somebody who needs to be recalled. This is clearly judicial overreach. What the issue of mass incarceration is not about is for rapists who were literally caught in the very act being set free by judges who decided just because you raped a woman, that doesn't mean that we should actually put you in prison. We see black people go to prison all the time with little to no evidence. You find out 40 years later that you had an innocent person sitting in prison. Washington Post is not too bothered about that. You got the white media trying to take two completely unrelated subjects and try to link them together as if they're the same thing when they're not. And to use the image of a black person as if a yuppie punk from a well-to-do suburban family is oppressed, that's complete garbage, but it's the white media's stock and trade. This Washington Post PR piece for Brock Turner actually tries to make him and Persky the victims, as if they're both being picked on by a mean old law professor who had too much power. That's how the story talks about Professor Dauber. That's how they describe her. They describe her as politically well-connected, and saying that judges are going to be scared they can lose their jobs if you got somebody with sufficient political capital to oppose them. But that's what they call her. She's politically well-connected. She's a professor at a nationally acclaimed law school with strong media ties. This is how the Washington Post, the paper of record inside the Beltway, describes a law professor who was simply trying to make sure that the law got applied to a rapist who was guilty as sin, caught in the very act. Notice the lack of outrage. Oh, I'm sorry, they got outrage all right. For the people who are saying that Brock Turner and his ilk should be punished. Yeah, because Brock Turner's the wrong color for the law to be applying to him. That's the problem that they've got. This kind of propaganda is a perverse joke. Saying that she's politically well-connected. She's a professor from Stanford. Brock Turner was a student at Stanford. And while his family wasn't as rich as, say, Ethan Couch, the affluenza teen who murdered 4 people, Brock Turner's family dang sure wasn't dirt poor either. And they were basically giving him all but a high five and a pat on the back. His father described the rape as being 20 minutes of action. And Brock Turner's mother was even more shameless about it. Far as she was concerned, her little thug didn't do anything wrong. Her little degenerate deviant didn't do anything wrong at all. This rapist wasn't some schlub who was taking night courses at Paducah Community College, yet the white media tries to frame it that way, like he's the victim, he's the underdog, and Judge Aaron Persky, he's not some judicial activist on the bench who wipes his behind with the laws. Instead, he's a judge trying to balance, he's trying to temper the needs of justice with the needs of the rights of the individual. Oh, now we care about the rights of the individual. But only if they're guilty as sin and their skin's the right color. The law professor who mounted the recall is politically connected, they say. Gee, is Professor Dauber more politically connected than career politician Aaron Persky? A law professor is more politically connected than a career politician? Really? Somebody who's held the office of Superior Court judge for many years, and apparently this law professor is more politically connected than this career politician. This is the kind of yellow journalism that you might expect to find from, say, OAN, or Newsmax, or Breitbart, or some other pretend media organization. And of course, you have the same phony pretend interest in the minorities. Oh, think about the minorities. The judges are already, we're getting reports that the judges are handing out harsher sentences because they're scared that they're going to be next. Think about the minorities. Brock Turner and Aaron Persky are both white. How the hell do you bring minorities into a discussion about 2 white men? And the victim that Brock Turner raped, this is a Eurasian woman. So what the hell has this got to do with black people? Because when you say minorities, that's what you mean. When you say mass incarceration, that's who you're talking about. You're not mixing apples and oranges, you're mixing apples and socket wrenches. The white media wants to be apologists for rapists? Fine, but you don't get to hide behind black people suffering to do it. You're not going to blackwash this criminality. And here's another one from NBC. They basically just cut and paste the same talking points as the Washington Post. You notice that happens to be the white media on code. They're all using the exact same talking points, trying to get across the exact same idea. You guys shouldn't be cheering for this. This wasn't a good thing. Think of the minorities. You should think of the minorities. They're the ones who are going to get hurt by all this. The minorities are the ones who are going to get hurt. The judges will be scared to go light on all these minorities. You can't have it both ways. You cannot in one breath say that we want the judges to go lighter on these minorities, and in the very next breath point out, the judges aren't going light on minorities. Well, it seems to me that the recall of Aaron Persky doesn't have any impact on the judges at all. So what are they really afraid of? Well, what they're really afraid of is that more people who look like Brock Turner are going to start going to prison. That's what they're concerned about. White media was all anxious, whether it was phony or not. They were at least putting forward the idea that they were anxious about what the ramifications for this could be. Yeah, because they understand that when laws get put on the books, people tend to think that they should be enforced against whomever the law was prompted by. Hey, we want to make sure the next time some suburban rapist gets caught on a university campus or anywhere else violating a woman, we want to make sure that this guy doesn't slip through the net, that this court just doesn't let him walk. Now, the white media was pretending as if the entire American judicial system was going to be coming to an end in 2016 because Aaron Persky got successfully recalled. And of course, as with everything else the white media says, is a total lie. Because in Illinois, just 2 weeks ago, we had another incident, practically the same as what Brock Turner did. You had this 18-year-old rapist who violated a 16-year-old child at a party. And in an example of what I've been telling you about these race soldiers who've been running around killing people, what happened was the defendant in this case said, I want a bench trial. Bench trial means that he gets tried by the judge. There is no jury. And what happened? The judge, of course, clearly looking at what happened with Aaron Persky in California, he's looking and going, I don't want to be next. So after he found that this guy was caught in the very act, violated this woman, what he did was, this punk, he actually held a pillow over the face of the woman that he raped so that nobody could hear her screaming while he was raping her. That's what this guy did. Again, you got a rapist, guilty as sin. So the judge clearly was terrified of what happened to Aaron Persky, and he decided, well, I don't want to go out like that, so I got to throw a book at this guy, because after all, there's a climate of fear because the Washington Post and NBC said so. Right? Wrong. What happened was the judge, he did one better than Aaron Persky. He didn't just say, well, let's go ahead and give this guy a lowball sentence. The judge looked and said, well, you know what? I don't want to ruin this young man's life. And the judge expressed that he was disgusted that there were young people swimming in their underwear at a pool and they were drinking underage, and is basically saying she deserved it, is what he was saying. Now, the judge did find this Clinton character guilty. But the problem the judge had was that under Illinois state law, there's mandatory sentencing guidelines in place. He flat out came out and said, I don't like the law and I don't think it should be applied and I don't want to do it. And I want to make sure that this guy is protected from any sort of appeals. Because if I give the wrong kind of sentence here, well, it'll just get overturned on appeal and he'll go to prison. So my goal here is to keep him out of prison. Nowhere in this does the judge say anything about the victim or about how heinous this crime was. Instead, it was nothing but this whining rant about how terrible it is that he can't exercise judicial discretion and the laws are just so tough and oh, how terrible it is. As the judge put it, Mr. Clinton has served almost 5 months in the county jail, 148 days. For what happened in this case, that is plenty of punishment. That would be a just sentence. Now, that was reprehensible enough to say that. He rapes an underage girl at a party, holds a pillow over her face, like something out of a horror film. And the judge looks and goes, 5 months, that's enough for you. We don't want to be too hard on the defendant. What about the woman that he raped? Well, she'll be aight. That'll teach her to be drinking somewhere or running around in her underwear at a pool, because God knows when you go to a pool, you're supposed to wear all your clothes. Make sure you keep your shoes on when you go in the pool. Everybody knows that. Come on. The judge just tore his behind in court. He went out of his way to show his complete contempt for the law, show his contempt for the rape victim, show his contempt for the parents in general. This guy shouldn't be working as a freaking social worker, much less a judge. The law doesn't give me the ability to give this guy a slap on the wrist. So that being the case, I'm going to throw my own guilty verdict out. Yeah, I heard the case. It was a bench trial. There was no jury. It was just my opinion. I say the guy's guilty. Yeah, but I don't want him to go to prison. The law won't allow me to do an end run. So I'm just going to throw the case out altogether and say, you know what, prosecutors, I changed my mind. You didn't prove that he was guilty. What are you going to do about it? In the case of this Judge Adrian, this guy committed an act of jurist nullification. He acknowledged that the defendant was guilty. He acknowledged that he had found the defendant guilty. He acknowledged that he knew exactly what the law was and what the punishment and penalty is supposed to be. And then he said, I don't give a rip. I don't like it. So as far as I'm concerned, I trump the law. And in the cases of both Brock Turner and Drew Clinton, you have both former Judge Persky and Judge Adrian who say that, well, they don't have any priors, the lack of criminal record, you see, and low likelihood that they'll do this again in the future. Yeah, because this is basically the same as them trespassing or something. Both of them committed brutal crimes. You got Brock Turner who rapes a woman behind a dumpster, and another guy, he decides to hold a pillow over her face so that she can't scream so nobody can hear him violating her. Yeah, that sounds like somebody who basically did this by accident. Certainly doesn't sound like Drew Clinton was practicing for his next victim or fine-tuning his methods of rape. Look, he doesn't have any prior convictions, and after all, we don't judge him as being a threat to the community. That's the kind of talk you'd expect for somebody who was convicted of a low-level, non-violent offense, not somebody who was caught in the very act of rape. Gee, where's all this talk about no priors and we don't deem him to be a threat to the community whenever the defendant is black? Because that's all we ever hear. And you want to know what else we didn't hear during this entire fiasco? All the tough talk about personal responsibility by the defendant. The defendant needs to take responsibility for his actions. And oh, by the way, where the heck were the defendant's parents at? This is a failure of parenting on their part. And we know that it's actually linked to a larger cultural failing now, don't we? Yeah, when the defendant's not black, all of a sudden we don't hear stuff like during Ethan Couch's trial, look at how weird and wacky his defense was. Affluenza, he just made that up. Oh, he just ran off to Mexico with his mother. Oh, that Ethan character, he's such a rogue. In the case of Brock Turner, nobody talks about his parents. What kind of home do you get raised in? Isn't this a failure of his community? And in the case of this Drew Clinton character, nobody's bringing up his parents. Nobody's bringing up personal responsibility. And nobody's asking how many other girls has he violated. Is this really the first time or just the first time he's been caught? See, when you have an entire culture that's geared around legal immunity for certain people, then what happens is they start abusing that legal immunity 5 ways from Sunday. Oh, you thought it was just going to be for small things like a traffic ticket. See, Ethan Couch thought to himself, I only need my white legal immunity to protect me from these DUIs. What about the 4 people you just hit with your pickup truck? Ooh, well, I guess I need my white immunity from law to work overtime. That's the kind of environment that there is. You can't have people who have been conditioned for hundreds of years that the law doesn't apply to them. They can expect lowball charges, or they can expect the verdict to be reduced, or if they're thrown out altogether, if the judge just decides, oh, we don't throw those kind of life sentences at this kind of defendant. That's for the black defendants. This guy over here, we're not supposed to be throwing those life sentences at him. We're not supposed to be hitting them with heavy charges. You want to, what? You want to tear down the entire system of perks and privileges that are holding this thing together? No, we can't do that. You got to see the big picture. And the white media is right in there with them. It's not the law that's in danger. It is the principle of legal immunity for those classified as white, which is one of the primary perks and privileges that's part of the tangible benefits of being classified as white. That has to be maintained. Now, at last report, there has at least been something that's happened in the case of Judge Adrian. Apparently, the chief judge in the circuit that he misserves in decided that the judge needed to be removed from handling criminal cases and instead put the guy on civil cases instead. Now, the white media, they keep using headlines saying the guy's been removed. Well, as we all understand under white supremacy, these clowns don't get removed, they just get transferred. And that's what happened in this case with this judge. Judge Adrian wasn't removed from the bench. He just simply got moved to another office. And of course, the white media is telegraphing the narrative that, okay, you guys, you made some noise and something was done. Okay, he's been removed. In other words, okay, you can stop now. You can stop now. Is it going to go any farther than this? This Adrian clown, he's already pretty old to begin with. It's entirely conceivable that if they try to put some real administrative punishment on him, he could just decide, well, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and retire now. I think I've done enough damage, enough good on the bench. This should not be the end of this matter at all, but that's pretty much how the white media is framing it now, and so I wouldn't be betting on the white media giving this story any more air. As far as they're concerned, they want to go ahead and close the book and move on to something else. Something that doesn't threaten the status quo. White media wants this to go away. They want this to be buried. Let's move on as quickly as possible. Last thing they want is anyone having an expectation that the law is supposed to apply equally to everyone. That's something that the dominant society simply refuses to understand. Once you've made the devil's bargain that the law is going to apply hyper-aggressively to some people, and for other people it won't apply at all, well, what you've done is you've set in motion the ability for the law to be disabled, if not removed altogether, when you need it the most. And before you know it, you're going to be looking at rampant examples of rapists who are raping children and you can't get them sent to prison, or they're overrunning the capital of the United States. And you're compelled to tell the judge, well, just have them cited for trespassing because I'm not sure that we can get a jury or a judge to overrule their immunity from law. That's something that they just don't want to have to accept. Once you've established judicial immunity from law, well, it's only a matter of time before someone decides to abuse their immunity against you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Elbert Sanders, Shabazz, Lockthees, Keith, and Samuel Phillip. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.